Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on one of our most profound explorations yet. We're going to tackle the central roadmap found right inside the source material you provided. Our mission is to really understand that direct, practical link between mindfulness, or Sati, and the ultimate goal of the whole path, extinguishment, which most people probably know as Nibbana.
And for you, the learner, this is really about seeing how these pieces function together, not just what they mean. The thing is, our sources don't present this path as some, philosophy for debate. It's laid out as a comprehensive training. It's a regimen designed to completely dismantle suffering, and mindfulness, samādhi, it's repeatedly flagged as the critical hinge point.
The engine.
Exactly. It's the engine that takes ethical conduct and actually turns it into liberating wisdom.
I really appreciate that focus on the practical, because you're right, these concepts can so often feel abstract, high level. But what's so clear from the texts is that they are outlining a specific, trainable method.
Absolutely. The path is sequential, and mindfulness is the factor that lets you see the world so clearly that the impulse to suffer it runs out of fuel.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. We have to start at the end. What exactly is Nibbana, this extinguishment? And why is it always described in terms of, cessation?
Well, the sources are remarkably consistent on this point. Fundamentally, Nibbana is defined by the ending of pain.
The ending of pain.
The definitive cessation of suffering. And they don't leave it vague either. They list what ends. Old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress.
Wow.
It's the final permanent break from that whole cycle of misery that's tied to being in a body.
That sounds incredibly comprehensive. So if it's the ending of that cycle, it suggests a complete break from whatever it is that causes us to keep generating suffering in the first place.
That's precisely it. And the imagery they use it's striking. The texts say this state is reached by shedding the near shore and the far shore like a serpent sheds its old, worn-out skin.
I want to pause on that serpent analogy. That's powerful. It suggests that the old state, the skin, was constricting, right? Heavy, something that had to be discarded.
And that you had to discard it yourself.
Right, there's agency there.
It speaks to the active, consequential nature of the goal. This isn't grace. This is the result of rigorous work. And the reason for that work is that the sources pinpoint the specific cause of suffering.
Which is?
Grasping. Grasping is what causes our continued existence in that painful cycle. The whole goal of the path is to become cooled, quenched, freed from lust, hate, and delusion because you have starved that grasping impulse.
Okay, wait a minute. So if the cause is grasping and Nibbana is the utter cessation of that, of that instigation, are the sources saying this is the goal for everyone? Or is this, more of a monastic goal? Because I think for a lot of listeners, the idea of cessation can sound a bit like annihilation, nothingness.
And that is a crucial distinction to make. The texts don't frame this as annihilation, but as freedom from the process of instigation. Freedom from the impulse to crave and to cling.
So it's the end of the cause of future suffering.
Exactly. It's attained by having directly known the end of rebirth. The end of that endless cycle of having to grab onto things to define yourself. You're liberated because the mechanism of attachment has been fully understood and then dismantled through training.
So the goal is the end of the impulse to suffer, not the end of consciousness itself. Which brings us right to the training.
And that training is the Noble Eightfold Path, right? Mindfulness, or samasati, is the seventh factor. And if you look at the architecture of the path, it's laid out in a very deliberate sequence.
Right. It starts with the right view, doesn't it? Like an intellectual understanding of what's going on.
Correct. You start with that necessary intellectual and, spiritual conviction. That's your framework. Then that immediately supports the ethical foundation. Right thought, speech, action, livelihood.
Okay.
Those ethical prerequisites are what give you the strength and concentration for right effort, which then feeds directly into right mindfulness.
So the sources are basically saying you can't just meditate your way out of suffering if your life is fundamentally scattered or, unethical. The practice needs that foundation of self-discipline to even hold the weight of the insight that comes later.
Precisely. If your life is driven by unskillful roots greed, deceit, your mindfulness is going to be unstable. It'll be all over the place. It's the ethical living that fosters the seclusion and the fading away that you need to cultivate stable attention. And that attention is what ripens into letting go.
And it's so interesting how many different systems within this path rely on mindfulness. It's one of the 5 spiritual faculties, right?
Yeah.
The power that allows faith and energy to lead to real wisdom.
It's the foundational block. It's also listed as the very first of the 7 awakening factors. It comes before investigation, before rapture, before tranquility and deep immersion.
So its placement there really underscores its role as the launch pad.
It has to be present, clear, stable. Otherwise, the other factors just don't arise.
And the metaphor the sources use for this whole structure is, well, it's quite powerful. They say developing the path causes a person to slant, slope, and incline to extinguishment. Just like the Ganges River naturally slants toward the east.
Think about that visual for a second. If you set up the first 6 factors correctly, the ethics, the effort, you're effectively shaping the landscape.
Right.
Once that foundation is solid, mindfulness is the force that guarantees the flow of your entire spiritual life is directed toward that goal. You're locking in the orientation. You're making the outcome inevitable.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of that lock. How do you cultivate this powerful moment-to-moment presence? This has to be where the Satipaṭṭhāna comes in, the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation.
This is the practical core, yes. Mindfulness is cultivated by meditating on 4 distinct objects of your experience. The body,
Okay.
your feelings, so pleasant, painful, or neutral, the mind itself, meaning the state of your consciousness, and finally, principles, the underlying systems of reality.
But the prerequisite for all of this observation is something that I think gets overlooked a lot. You have to approach the practice keen, aware, and mindful, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. You can't start if you're already internally fighting with reality.
That impartial, non-judgmental stance is everything. If you approach the body or your feelings while craving them or hating them, you are immediately fueling the very grasping we were just talking about. True mindfulness requires a clean slate, just clear, non-clinging observation.
Let's get specific with the body practice, Anupassanā, maybe through the lens of breathing, Anupassanā. The sources give surprisingly technical instructions. It's way more than just notice your breath.
Oh, it's a very deliberate, staged exercise. The practitioner goes to a secluded spot, sits straight, and focuses. The first stage is simply knowing whether your breath is heavy or light. That's a gross observation. Then you practice experiencing the whole body of the breath, feeling the entire cycle. And finally, you practice to still physical processes.
Stilling physical processes.
Yeah.
That sounds intense. Are we talking about, like, stopping the breath?
No, it's not about holding your breath or forcing anything. It refers to calming the physical agitation that usually comes with anxiety or craving. You're refining your focus from gross movement to subtle energy, letting your nervous system completely settle.
And that deep stillness is what creates the mental space for insight to arise.
Exactly.
What's fascinating to me is that this same discipline has to extend way beyond just sitting on a cushion. The sources demand constant situational awareness in all daily activities. Walking, standing, eating, drinking, even speaking and being silent.
Yeah.
This moment-to-moment presence is the training ground.
And we see the perfect illustration of this discipline in one of the sources. It's a powerful anecdote about the Buddha. When his foot was cut by a splinter, he was struck by, quote, harrowing pains. But what did he do? He endured it unbothered with mindfulness and situational awareness.
He didn't let the pain shatter his composure.
He just observed it. He remained present and he laid down mindful and aware.
That's such a profound application. It shows that right mindfulness is the tool that stabilizes the mind. It prevents it from being scattered by aversion, even under acute physical suffering. It's the difference between experiencing pain and letting that pain become suffering.
And that stability is the key mechanism. It's how you get to Nibbana. The entire spiritual life is aimed at a complete understanding of how our feelings, pleasant, painful, or neutral, arise conditioned by contact. If we can understand that process perfectly, we can intervene.
And this is where we have to look really closely at the senses, because this seems to be the junction. This is where suffering either starts or where it stops. Mindfulness has to observe the 6 sense fields, eye and sights, ear and sounds, and so on. It has to see the clinging, the fetter that arises depending on them.
And the practice has to reveal the entire trajectory, how that fetter arises, how it's abandoned, and most critically, how it is never allowed to rise again. If you can see that whole mechanism, the cycle is broken.
And this brings us back to that crucial concept you mentioned earlier, relishing. If a person approves, welcomes, and clings to a likable sight or sound or an idea, that approval gives rise to relishing. And that relishing is explicitly defined as the origin of suffering.
Relishing is the crucial bridge. A feeling itself, pleasant or painful, is just contact. It's neutral. But relishing is the added mental activity of clinging to the pleasant or pushing away the painful.
So it's the mental engagement that says, I want more of this, or this defines me.
That's the mental fuel. That's what creates greed and future suffering.
But wait, isn't it just natural to welcome pleasure?
Yeah.
Why is relishing considered the dangerous act here? The difference between just feeling something and actually creating suffering from it?
Because relishing is built on a false assumption of permanence. Mindfulness, when it's applied rationally, reveals the impermanence of all these sense objects. The feeling arises, and then it vanishes. If you truly see that sights and sounds and ideas are transient, you lose the impulse to invest all that energy in them. You see the futility of chasing them.
So seeing that impermanence leads to disillusionment. Not disappointment, like we use the word today, but a cessation of the illusion that these things can offer any permanent satisfaction.
Precisely. And the sources synthesize this perfectly into the core principle of freedom. When relishing ends, greed ends. When greed ends, relishing ends. When relishing and greed end, the mind is said to be well freed.
That's the ultimate function of mindfulness, then.
It is. It stars the impulse to relish.
And the result of that freedom is the ultimate non-clinging, not regarding the five grasping aggregates form, feeling, perception, choices, consciousness as mine, I am this is myself. When you realize those are not you, you're liberated.
You're liberated because the very subject that was doing the relishing, the I that was grasping, has been fully understood as just another transient, conditioned process.
What an incredible structure this path lays out. The roadmap to extinguishment isn't about escaping reality. It's built entirely on engaging with reality, moment to moment. Right mindfulness is the practical daily tool for observing the body, feelings, and mind, and just constantly dismantling that subtle impulse to cling or prove or generate relishing.
And that stability, which is provided by right mindfulness, is what fulfills the 7 awakening factors, and those ultimately fulfill knowledge and freedom. It all relies on that disciplined cultivation of seclusion, fading away, cessation, and finally letting go. Mindfulness is the instrument that transforms a set of good ideas into a complete engine of transformation.
The sources show us that freedom is achieved when one's consciousness is neither scattered and diffused externally nor stuck internally, and you are not anxious because of grasping. When that anxiety and grasping end, the origin of future suffering ceases. So if freedom relies on this clear, stable observation of the present moment, preventing the mind from scattering into desire or sticking in aversion, what momentary anchors in your current life could serve as your next object of liberation? Something as simple as the sound of your own voice, the feeling of your feet on the floor, or the texture of your next breath. The work begins now.